Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Robert S. Colter. Rob serves as a senior lecturer in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Wyoming. After earning his PhD from Northwestern University in 2001, he has dedicated his career to the study of ancient philosophy and philosophical pedagogy. Rob's commitment to bringing philosophy beyond classroom walls is evident in his work organizing an annual Stoic camp, which is open to the public, and teaching philosophy courses in Wyoming's correctional facilities. When not engaged in philosophical pursuits, Rob enjoys spending time with his family, cooking, reading, and fly fishing in Wyoming's magnificent wilderness. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. Help me welcome Rob Colter.
Awesome. Well, yeah, great. Thanks for inviting me, Phil. I'm looking forward to talking about this. I want to just talk about one famous passage today and flesh out some of the ideas in it um, from Marcus's meditation here on his birthday. Uh, so I saw that somebody else has a birthday as well. So happy birthday to all involved. I can expand on a couple things that Phil mentioned, and I think it might be worth doing. Um, yeah, so ancient philosophy is sort of my academic focus, but as I sort of alluded to earlier, my graduate school work and early career work was more focused on Plato and Aristotle, and of course I studied Stoicism among all the other schools as well, but it didn't really become a thing for me until quite a bit later, right? Um, Another thing too uh, about the other things I do is Wyoming Stoic Camp, and there's still a handful of spots left if anybody's interested. Um, is something I've been doing for over a decade now, where we go up into the mountains outside in Wyoming here to the snowy range of the Rocky Mountains, and we read and talk about Stoic philosophy for 5 days and 4 nights, and we do it pretty intensely. But we also get into some, do some hiking. And last year there was a whole family of moose near us that we had to be uh, appropriately prudent with regard to. And also, then a few years later, I got roped into, not so much roped into, but asked to be part of our fledgling prison education program here at the University of Wyoming, of which I'm now director. And I got started in doing that by teaching Stoic philosophy to incarcerated people in Wyoming. And so I say all that by way of pointing out the importance of this passage we're going to start with. Marcus's Meditations, as I'm sure many of us know, if not all of us, is a series of, it's a collection of sort of aphoristic short passages for the most part. The first book, or notebook, as what Waterfield calls them, that the first book of the Meditations is one um, in which he does thank yous and things it's kind of things he's grateful for, and people who have helped him along the way and been influences or inspirations to him. And it's very different from the rest of the work. But book two starts off with a bang, and book two is often, I think it's a great place to start, because it's really, when I teach it, I always start with book two, because book one I think is sometimes best come to at the end. Uh, but I wanted to start off, and I'm just going to read this aloud from the hard translation. Uh, and so, book two, chapter one, he says, say to yourself at the start of each day, I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, and unsociable people. They are subject to all these defects because they have no knowledge of good and bad. But I, who've observed the nature of the good and seen that it is the right, and of the bad and seen that it is the wrong, and of the wrongdoer himself and seen that his nature is akin to my own, not because he is of the same blood and seed, but because he shares as I do in mind and thus in a portion of the divine. I then can neither be harmed by these people, nor become angry with one who is akin to me, nor can I hate him. For we've come into being to work together, like feet, hands, eyelids, or the two rows of teeth in our upper and lower jaws. To work against one another is therefore contrary to nature, and to be angry with another person and turn away from him is surely to work against him. Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are worth noting about this passage. I think there's a lot of things packed into it. It seems like a simple passage, but there's some really central Stoic ideas in here that I think can be fleshed out, and that's what I want to do. I will say, right, the first sentence, right, say to yourself at the start of the day, I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, etc. people. When I teach these to, especially to the incarcerated folks, um, what I what I get is, oh, I know that guy, right? And sometimes I also get, oh, I am that guy, the ungrateful, meddling, unsociable, surly folks. Um, so I find most people identify with Marcus's what almost can be seen as a complaint here at the beginning, right? Remind yourself you're going to meet with all these jerks today. I got to go. I do this all the time, right? I've got to go have a meeting with administrators, or I've got to teach that class that I don't really love teaching with those students who aren't doing the reading, or whatever it happens to be, right? Or I have to go to the dentist. Um, I have to go to the dentist. That's another one. Although my dentist is rather nice, but generally don't like the dentist, as most of us do. But I wanted to point out a couple other things that happen past that. And he says that they are subject to all these defects because they have no knowledge of good and bad. So I think a lot of times people who encounter this for the first time, or maybe after a few times, don't always get what he's saying there. And I sometimes get pushback, right? No, they aren't jerks because they don't know better, people might say. They're jerks because they're jerks. But I think Marcus is appealing to a really sort of fundamental Stoic principle that they borrow from Socrates that I'm going to want to flesh out throughout the morning today. And that's this idea that Socrates talks about in multiple places in Plato, especially, um, and that is that nobody does wrong willingly. This is a thesis known as Socratic moral intellectualism, which is just a fancy way of saying um, that nobody does wrong willingly, but it's that mistakes, evils, being a jerk are a function really of ignorance, not of ill will. This idea gets a lot of pushback, not just among students I've taught it to, or incarcerated students, or people at Stoic camp, or whatever, but also among philosophers who work on ethical questions quite a bit. But but the idea is something like this. If I choose to do something, I choose it because I think it's a good, or at least I choose it because I think it's the best available option. And it turns out that if that's right, that explains a lot of things. It explains why people choose the things they choose because they have a misconception about what the good is. So it's not to say that people aren't wrong about that. People are wrong all the time. That's why they're meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, and unsociable. They're wrong about all of that. But their wrongness has to do with what they know and what they don't, right? If I'm under the conception that, the ultimate good is money, I'm going to make decisions that lead me towards however I can get as much of that as I can. And that might involve doing things that under other circumstances I wouldn't do. But if somebody's between me and getting more money, I might treat them in ways that others might think are unfair or cruel or vicious. Um, but if I'm firmly convinced that getting money is the best thing I can be doing, then none of that will matter. And so it's a mistake about what's good. And sometimes it can be a mistake about how to get to what's good. So in that second sentence of this passage, he's just laying out that these people have these defects because they have no knowledge of good and bad. Um, Somebody brought up in the chat psychopaths. We'll get back to that. But I mean, and that's a fairly common objection. Another thing that comes out happens next, right? He says, I've observed the nature of the good and seen that it's the right, and of the bad, seen that it's the wrong, right? So Marcus is claiming that he knows this, but maybe these wrongdoers don't. But here's the part I want to focus on. And of the wrongdoer himself, and seen that his nature is akin to my own, not because he's of the same blood and seed, but because he shares as I do in mind, and thus in a portion of the divine. Okay, so that bit there is he's pointing at something that's also fundamental to the Stoic picture, and that is this: we are all part of the same cosmos. This is the foundational principle that leads to what we sometimes call Stoic cosmopolitanism. So the idea here is that we're all connected because of our fundamental nature that is pro-social, as a lot of people want to say. I am a social being. I'm a rational being. And given those two features of my nature, we're all of the same family. This idea is brought out pretty vividly in a pretty well-known passage taken from the Epitome of Stoic Ethics by Aristodemus, which is preserved for us in the texts of Stobaeus. And that is the circles of Hierocles. Probably many people here have heard about this, but the idea is that, look, when I'm born, I seem to only be concerned with myself, right? I want to get food, I want to get comfort, whatever else. But as I grow up a little bit, I start to recognize that the world is bigger than just me. And I start to take it to be important that those closest to me matter, right? Because they're like me. And maybe I want to be like them. So think about parents, maybe siblings, stuff like that. I start to think that maybe, or maybe my own children as an adult, of course, right? I start to think that maybe those people matter just as much as I do. I mean, parents often say something like, I'd die for my children, things like that, or I'd die for my brother or sister. Maybe not I'd die for my parents, but that's kind of weird. Um, and what Hierocles suggests is that we can expand this because we're rational and social beings. We can also start to recognize that not only my immediate family, but perhaps more extended family, cousins, grandparents, grandkids, perhaps like my in-laws start to matter as much. I start to recognize that they matter morally as much as I do. And then Hierocles suggests that we can expand that. We can keep expanding that to my neighbors, to my fellow citizens, ultimately out to the point where we see that everybody matters all the way out to the ends of the cosmos, because we're all part of one big nature. And that brings me to my final point that I want to get out of this passage, I think. He says, "For we have come into being to work together, like feet, hands, eyelids, or the two rows of teeth in our upper and lower jaws. To work against one another is therefore contrary to nature, and to be angry with another person and turn away from him is surely to work against him." Now here he's appealing to another really famous Stoic doctrine, and that is about what the goal of life is. The goal of life, or eudaimonia, on their account, is to live in agreement or consistently with nature. And nature, as they understand it, of course, is not just bunnies and trees and rocks and moose and the sort of things we might encounter at Stoic camp or something. It includes you and me, and everybody else. It also includes cities and towns and subway stations and all of that. These are all parts of nature writ large. And what he's saying here is this rational and pro-social nature that we have as human beings is something that lays certain obligations on us in a way, right? It means that I am sort of then morally obligated to recognize my place in nature and what that entails for me. And that is that I need to work in agreement or consistently with all of nature. And that includes even the meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, and unsociable people. And I think these are just a few of the ideas. And I'm happy to talk more if people want about them. But I think just this one short passage that opens up book 2 of Marcus's Meditations, the first ones that are really sort of reflective rather than just giving thanks, is filled with all these ideas that evoke, even if they don't explain, but they evoke these hugely important Stoic principles, right? The idea about living in agreement with nature, both nature writ large and our own nature as pro-social rational entities, right? And what that entails, right? And that entails taking on or giving a damn about even those people who, I don't like, those people who act like jerks. I have to sort of give a damn about them. They have to recognize that they too, just as much as me, are part of this rational pro-social universe that I'm trying to live in agreement with. And also that a function of that is that when I recognize um, the way I think about right and wrong or good and bad, I can see, again, the Stoic, controversial Stoic Socratic idea, I can see that all of those wrongdoings are a function of what we might call mistakes. Mistakes about the nature of value, mistakes about what things are valuable, mistakes about how to get to the things that are valuable. All of these can explain wrongdoing. And these are big picture ideas, ideas that Plato has Socrates explain in multiple dialogues over and over again. Ideas that are still debated today among philosophers and others. Um, this conception of nature, somebody pointed out Spinoza, absolutely super influential conception of nature and of our role in it, right? So the idea here is not only am I a natural being, so are you, you jerk. Um, and it's my job to orient myself to that and try to live a good life with you, not against you. So I'll pause there. Bit of an overview. I don't know. How's that for a start, Phil?